So if we go straight into it, and the first question that was on here is, what is sensory processing disorder? Also known as sensory integration dysfunction. All rubbish terminologies really. Disorder, dysfunction. It just means we have difficulties in my explanation.
It's fun, isn't it, really? I mean, we say conditions, I mean, sensory processing disorder, and I'm trying not to do too many facts and figures, but I think it's something like 10% of ADHD people have sensory integration dysfunction or sensory processing disorder, and they're already called ADHD disorder.
Yeah.
And now we're telling them they're dysfunction, and we're talking about the low self-esteem. I mean, it's no wonder, is it? We're calling everyone disordered and dysfunction.
Yeah, and the same with autism, spectrum disorder.
Yeah.
Everything's disorder, dysfunction, and everything else. And we are who we are. We have what we have, but there's certain things within sensory where our filters in our brain are not working in the way that we would necessarily expect them to do, so we have difficulties along the road with various things. So we've got within sensory, there's three main areas. I'm not going to ask you, Andrew, because you probably haven't got down to the nitty-gritty of the three main areas of sensory, because you're more
holistic.
Holistic is the word. Yeah, I was going to use.
It's difficult because when I'm delivering training, time limitations are such that I have to generalise so massively. So if we're looking at sensory integration dysfunction, we look at, I may well deliver something that says, well, we're doing a few minutes on modulation, a few minutes on discrimination, and then the motor disorder, and we might do 20 minutes on that, 20 minutes on that, 20 minutes on that, tick, 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 tick. But life's not really like that, is it? No. And we were speaking off camera before we started to say, actually, it's different for different people. And one of the phrases I use is, okay, let's start with this. So we might start with sensory modulation disorder, but ultimately, it's not what it's about. And that's just a hook to hang your hat on. That's just a starting point, I think.
It is, and the majority of children that we will be involved in will be the sensory modulation disorder type. The motor disorder, so that's your dyspraxia type child. Yeah. And then the discrimination, that's where you're down to your sight or your hearing or your touch or smell specifically, but everything else in your life is okay, but these things are really done. So we normally have with our children a complete mix of everything, which is why we talk about the modulation more than anything else. Yeah. And the problem is we're getting the authorities, and I'm not talking just Lincolnshire, but the authorities in general don't recognise sensory processing disorder as a main area, because the DSM book for the psychiatrists and all the other professionals who will look at putting this into place sort of say, well, it's not in the DSM, therefore we cannot acknowledge it as a condition that we can put a diagnosis to.
So as I get more involved in my job, and I've been doing this job so many years now, I don't even know how many, and as I get more involved, the further down this road I get, the less I understand. And that is the truth. If you spoke to me 20 years ago, I'd have a very simple, quick answer for you. Now, my experience has grown, and I know more people, and I've seen more cases. It's become actually more complicated to me. And here, I can understand what the authorities are doing, because they're going sensory modulation disorder. Okay, that's part of autism. So that's the sensory bit. So now let's look for the rigid thinking, let's look for the communication, let's look for all the other bits and bobs. Oh, they're not there, so they're not autistic, so there's nothing wrong. And actually, it's like you can pull any of these things apart. So autistic spectrum disorder, if you've just got the rigid thinking, then that can be a condition in itself, and that is obsessive compulsive disorder. You know, you can pull all these things apart. You can, you know, if you pull the communication out, you go, oh yeah, speech and language, and this is the difficulty, you know. And I started off saying, oh, it's a hook to hang your hat on, and then I'm saying, but sometimes it isn't. You know, and there's no rules, right?
There is no rules, and the saving grace for me is that you can look at this and sort of say, how do we get this diagnosed? Well, we've got the occupational therapists, and the occupational therapists can carry out a sensory processing assessment, and it's really quite in depth, and it will pull out where the main difficulties are, which then helps. Because we can get a diagnosis of autism, we can get a diagnosis of ADHD, but then sometimes people say they're not autistic or they're not ADHD, and it's a matter of, are they? Well, they've got the diagnosis, but is it trauma? Is it sensory? Is it this? There's just so much involved, and for me, sensory is almost the hug around all these conditions. Because it's creating the communication difficulties, because I don't understand this, or why is my head so sore, why is this going on, and it can disguise all the other things.
I always advise parents and professional to deal with sensory first before you do anything else. And I use the example, like sensory stimulation will shut anything down. Absolutely. You know, I always joke about the mother, shut up, I'm trying to think. You know, that's a sensory issue, isn't it? I'm trying to sort this out. That, you know, I do it myself. You know, my son comes in, wandering in while I'm working, and I'll go, look, just, you know, can you just come back in 20 minutes? Is that sensory? That's absolute sensory. If you're looking at, I had one particular case where I was in for a whole day to look at a reception class, where there were massive amounts of challenging behaviours, and I nailed it down to a noisy boiler within 5 minutes of being in the room. Sensory every time, and this is, you know, this is absolutely 100% your starting point. You mentioned diagnosis, so for me as well, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of cases I've dealt with, and case studies I've dealt with over the years, where I have not agreed with the diagnosis, and I've gone, I don't see this issue here. And this is where the sensory processing disorder, you can pull that out. You can pull that out and go, okay, we've got a little bit of sensory processing issue going on here, don't want to undermine it, and, you know, and there's a bit of obsessive compulsive to here. Doesn't mean they're autistic.
No.
You know, but that's the likely diagnosis you're going to get.
It is.
You know,
it is, and it is difficult, because you're within schools. You say we'll set up a sensory diet or a sensory plan for you, but unless you actually know where the difficulties within sensory lie, I find it difficult. How can you put something in place? Because is that the right solution to deal with that particular overload?
Well, now you're talking about, let's make a sensory room. We'll stick a few lights in it. we'll have one of those plastic goldfish things that swim around, and you know, some sort of vibrating cushions and all this stuff, which I am a big fan of all this kind of stuff, but that's your sensory room. Well, it might be your sensory room. That would drive me nuts. Can I tell you something funny?
Go on.
Okay, so I've seen these, they're like wires, and they've got a little handle, and they're for a head massage.
Oh yes, the head massage.
Yeah, right. So my wife got a headache. She'd been getting headaches. I said, I'll get you one of these things. She said, oh. So I've been doing that on her head. Oh, she's great. Oh, that's lovely. She said, you want me to do it for you? I said, yeah, do it for me. Oh, get that thing off me. And then when it's off, I'm like, scratching my head. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to see what, some of you will know my son Isaac, who's done some work for us. I said, Isaac, try this thing. And he's going, God, what is that awful thing? You know, it's not a one size fits all.
It's not.
It's not a one size. A sensory, you know. One man's meat's another's poison. You know, she's there loving this thing, and I'm going, take that thing away from me. And you know, well, that's your sensory room, isn't it?
Yeah.
A sensory room, a sensory space, a sensory environment is only ever going to be suitable for a minority.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and also, yeah, let's talk about that sensory room. You know, how many children can you put in a sensory room?
One,
yeah, absolutely. Because because if you put one that's having a meltdown next to one that wants a little nap, you know, that's it, isn't it? I'm glad you said that. You can have two if they get on well.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, for the experience to work properly, it's just one. It
Yeah.
has to be what they like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so going out and buying loads of different things can be difficult too, because they say, oh, they're not going to play with it, whatever, and it's a matter of sensory doesn't work. Well, it does if you've got the right stuff, and it's knowing. And I know you've done blogs on different things,
different resources.
Resources.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Resources, things that are the same. So that's it. But when we talk about diagnosis, the thing that I find within the motor disorder, and we talk about dyspraxia, which can be a really challenging thing, particularly at school with the fine motor skills and things like that, is it there again, you cannot get somebody to diagnose dyspraxia.
So dyspraxia, DCD, developmental coordination disorder, possibly one of the least well understood conditions in my mind. So dyspraxia is neurological, it's not physical.
Yeah.
And is, so people think, oh, there's something wrong, he can't do his buttons up, so there's something wrong with his fingers, her fingers, or something like that. That's not it. Your problem is that it's a very close, we're back to it again. So when I said sensory processing and OCD, if you put those together, you've got something that looks a lot like autism. Dyspraxia is the same thing, it looks a lot like ADHD, and that's, in my experience, I've worked with a lot of dyspraxic young people who have not got a dyspraxic diagnosis, but do have ADHD diagnosis. Yeah. Because they're so similar. They look alike, you know.
Yeah. And there's work that you can do on these things to strengthen the muscles that need strengthening to allow them to overcome.
And ironically, they're physical activities.
Yes.
So I get these big round floor tile things with oil in them, coloured oil. And for me, I say, well, this is neurological. And so it's not about the fingers or the hands. So let's get your fingers and hands doing this thing. Listen, because now we're training the brain. Yeah. We're working with neuroplasticity. We're training the brain. We're using these hands to do this stuff. Exactly the same thing we would do if it was the hands. Yeah. And so it's complicated for people, you know. And so in that particular instance, what you're doing is you're going, right, it doesn't matter about the outcome, the act of progressing through this condition is gonna achieve two different things. So that's either neurological or with the hands, and so that's great. So we can do the same thing, but that doesn't apply to all conditions.
It doesn't.
So we've got sensory processing disorder. Say we've got someone with sensory processing disorder, and one of my absolute sort of obsessions, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Yeah. They're going to be presenting the same, but one is about a brain needing neuroplastic interventions. What I mean by that is doing things over and over and over again to train the brain to be able to achieve those things. That's fine for sensory processing disorder, but if that person is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, we're dealing with brain damage here. You can't, you know, it's like a car with three wheels. You know, it just isn't. I don't mean reliant. I mean
the good old Robin.
Yeah, but it's a faulty piece of equipment, and you're never going to get it to work, or unlikely.
But that then goes back to the start where you were saying, I'll do this a lot, lose my concentration of what we were about. But you mentioned, oh my goodness. So we're talking about the sensories, the diagnosis, the
misdiagnosis. No.
No, I'll have to come back to it because there was a really poignant bit there. Because I diverted slightly, I've lost my train of thought, and I'm not ADHD.
I am.
But yeah, it's really important for all of this. I'm trying to desperately come back, and we will come back.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, whilst you're talking about it, something occurred to me as well. You said trying to get a dyspraxia diagnosis is really difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah? This is because it's a tick box campaign. It's a tick box campaign. Dyspraxia is a very simple condition in its basics. It's imaging, planning, execution. Looking at what I've got to do, making a plan how I'm going to do it, and doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, in reality, you know, that's fine, you know, but it may be, I mean, go back to the car analogy, yeah? I mean, it's all well and good me saying to one of my boys, you know, you're going to change that wheel. All you got to do, have a look at it, see what's there. You've got to take these nuts out, yeah? So they plan in that, and they've looked at what they've got to do, and then they've got to do it. But the reality is, it's a difficult job when you've not done it before. No. Let's go to just slip into, because all these conditions are connected. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Yeah.
Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, it's a tick box diagnosis. So I, for example, I've worked with young people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and I've gone, right, the eye thing, yeah, I can see the eye thing there, and the ear thing, and the chin thing, and forgive me, you know, these are the presentations, but there's no smooth filtrum. They've got everything else, but not that. And I will send something off to say this needs investigating, and it'll bounce back and say, well, we haven't got the smooth filtrum. Okay, this filtrum's the little thing on your lips there. So we haven't got the smooth filtrum. And I'm saying, but it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum, and you might not. But of course, the diagnostic is a tick box diagnostic.
Yes.
And this is where your sensory processing disorder. I mean, I've got sensory processing disorder. I've got a subset of sensory processing disorder called auditory processing disorder. Mm. So apart from the fact that I'm getting older, there's nothing wrong with my eyes, my touch, anything like that. But when it comes to hearing, that's where my difficulties occur. Mm. Incredibly difficult to diagnose. Yeah. Incredibly, you know, and because it doesn't show up on any of the tests. No,
and this is what my point I was trying to remember.
Is this the one you were trying to?
So it was coming back to, you started at the very beginning of, we need to start with sensory. Sensory is the first start.
100%.
Because we can eliminate a lot of anxieties, a lot of stresses, if we identify where are the things that are the overload in our brain, reduce that, so we've now got a different level to deal with.
Brain chatter.
Yeah.
Brain chatter, let me tell you. Okay. So you know I'm a man of stories, right? What you all don't know, but what Gordon knows is, over Christmas, we're in January now, over Christmas, I've had an infestation of mice in the house. Okay, so the mice are in the house. The mice are in the walls. Okay. The mice are in the walls. They generally wake up about 3:30 in the morning. All this going on. Oh man, there's mice in the walls. What am I going to do? You know, and yeah. Is it the mice in the walls bothering me? No, it's the noise that's bothering me. If those mice were silent, I wouldn't have a problem with those mice.
Yeah.
Yeah? If I can see them, sensory, I've got a problem. If I can hear them, I've got a problem. That's where mice are doing it wrong, aren't they? But if they're, I don't care, because I don't know they're there.
Yeah.
Schrodinger's mice, you know, Schrodinger's mice. I don't know they're there, so they're not there. I hope I've not misapplied Schrodinger there.
Schrodinger's a little bit difficult for me. I don't understand it.
No, I don't understand it, but don't tell anybody. But that's the point, isn't it? The sensory. We're not starting with the fear of the mice. We're not starting.
No.
We're starting with a sensory problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can I shut that up?
Indeed.
It's woken me up. It's got the knock-on effects. You get woken up. You've got the anxiety. You've got the what might happen. All these different things.
Yeah, because the head chatter is, what if they run across the floor?
Yeah.
Oh my God, what if I see it? And, and your head just goes off in an imaginary world.
Yeah. Never mind how I'm going to calm my wife down. but that's...
Well, it's your wife that woke you, not the mice. Because she heard the mice first.
Yeah, that is actually true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so that's what sensory is all about. And that sensory has to be applied first, you know. And when we're looking at behaviour, sensory, you know, we've got children, they hide underneath noises. I remember 100 years ago now, I was doing a teaching placement, so this is back in my teaching days, and this head teacher said, I'm going to get you to come in and watch me do an assembly wrong, and then I'm going to get you to watch me do it right.
Yeah.
And this was incredible. I've not told anyone this for years. So anyway, he went into the assembly. You know, they have a bit of classical music playing. He played it loud. That's the first thing he did. And he had his back to the children sorting out some bits of paper for his assembly on like an altar. I think it was a church school. So, and the kids are all nattering and messing about and being silly because they're hiding under the noise. Yeah, they're hiding. So there's loud music, and they're hiding underneath that. The following day, he turns the music down and he faces them, and they come in dead silent. And this is all about the sensory, you know. And so I do a thing. I talk about, you know about this. Well, we do sensory audits in schools. I'll go into a school. I'll do a sensory audit. Yeah, what can I see? What can I hear? Is there clutter? Clutter is a really big sensory issue. Yeah, you know, what you can imagine. I go into a school and I say, right, okay. Job number one, you've got to tidy up all this mess. You've got it's just got a dead plant on the window edge. There's always a dead spider plant. Yeah. You know, there's a pile of books up here. There's some of you will know Rebecca Duffus, and she loved this. If you don't know Rebecca Duffus, buy her book. It's great. And she's got a family now, so she needs the money. But I talk about sensory sense. Is that stuff on the wall of any importance? Should it be there? Yeah. If it makes no sensory sense to be there, take it down. Yeah. And then the other one I call is display decay. Right? When you've got a number line and 53 is missing, I guarantee 3-4 kids in that class are going about, teachers talking about Franz Ferdinand being shot in the Balkans, and they're looking at this missing number, not taking anything in. Sensory, yeah. Okay. My dad, I've never forgiven him for this. He's in his 80s now, but I've still never. He bought Concord wallpaper when I was a kid.
All right.
And
that went out fast.
And he bought this Concord wallpaper, and he didn't match up. He got the ump. He was in a bad mood. He didn't match up the nose with the rest, so we had Concord and then the nose down here, and the whole room was like that. And I remember thinking, hours and hours lying awake, staring at this. Yeah. Yeah. Does it make sensory sense? No. It's absolutely dreadful.